Gracias por dar la luz y el entusiasmo de esta red de jóvenes para trabajar mano a mano en tu nombre. Te pedimos que te quedes con nosotros y nos permitas vivir este webinar con alegría y que sea de provecho para marcar el camino y trabajo en el que nos vamos a dirigir. Quédate pues con nosotros hoy y siempre, en el nombre de tu Hijo amado Jesucristo. Amén.
Hello, everyone. And now we are ready to start the conversation with our guest today, Savanna Sullivan. Savanna Sullivan, she, her, hers, serves as program executive for LWF Youth and lives in Chicago, Illinois, USA. She holds a bachelor's degree in biology and ethics from Clemson University and a master's in theology from Wartburg Theological Seminary. She has previously lived in Ghana, Rwanda, working with youth at the invitation of the Lutheran Church of Rwanda. She is passionate about helping young people connect to their own spirituality and pushing the church to equip, amplify, and respect the voices of young leaders. Savanna also loves her puppy, Violet, loves to sing and loves hiking in the mountains. Amazing. In our conversation now, Savanna is going to share a bit more of her journey as a youth leader. That way we get to learn more about her. Following, we will hear about her perspective now working with the global youth work, her perspectives on intergenerational dialogue, as well as her expectations for the LWF Assembly. Finally, we will hear about her expectations working with us, the LAC Youth Network. Welcome, Savanna. It's amazing talking to you about such interesting topics. Shall we start with the first question?
Yeah, thank you so much, Renato. It's really fun to be here with you all. And I'm looking forward to this also being a conversation. So excited if people have questions to hear those too. Let's get started.
Yes, nice. So we want to get to know a little bit better. So tell us a bit more about yourself, your background, your projects. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. So Renato gave you a beautiful formal introduction of me. So I'll just say maybe a bit more about some of the experiences that have led me here. I most recently myself served as a Global Young Reformers delegate from the North America region and got the opportunity to collaborate a lot with the Latin America and the Caribbean Youth Network, which was really awesome. I have learned a lot from all of you already. Before that, my kind of call into youth ministry was formed at summer camps. I don't know how many of you maybe have worked at a youth camp before, but I went to one for 10 years growing up, and then I worked at 3 different youth camps across the US when I was at university. After that, I lived in Rwanda, as Renato said, working with youth. And then when I got the job as the director of young adult or youth ministries at the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, which is my home church, I also got to help run the International Camp Counselors Program, which I think maybe some folks on the call have been a part of that program or know someone who has been a part of that program. So I got the opportunity to welcome like 40 youth from different LWF member churches around the world to the US every summer, and got to know them and learn from them and work with them. So as a program, that's had a really big impact on my call into global youth work. A little bit more about the work that I did with the ELCA. Some of the projects and programs that were closest to my heart are, I started the first discernment retreat for youth in the ELCA. So there were about 300 youth over the course of my time there who were brought together for fellowship, but also to learn tools and skills for discernment in making difficult decisions faithfully over the course of their whole lives. I also began in this last year during COVID in 2020, we began with the help of youth leaders from across the ELCA, the Abide community, which is a community of over 1,000 youth who met every week during the pandemic to talk about life and faith, and whose reflections and videos were also used as resources not only for other youth, but for the whole church. So that's a community that is really close to my heart as well. And those are some of the main projects that I've worked on over the last few years with the ELCA. And I'm excited to learn more about the projects and programs of the LAC network. I know a little bit about it, but look forward in our conversation to hearing more about what you all do.
Thank you very much, Savanna. We'll move on to the second one.
Great.
A partir de tu experiencia en el trabajo como coordinadora de jóvenes, ¿hacia dónde ves que va el trabajo juvenil de la Federación Luterana Mundial en el mundo y el trabajo con la red de Latinoamérica y el Caribe?
Thanks for that question, Alejandra. There are a couple parts of this answer, I think, and the main points that I want to really talk about a lot today are that going forward, I really think that the youth work of the LWF needs to be totally youth-led at all levels, which means that as a staff person, even though I am a youth, I don't come with all of the good ideas and then just tell everyone what to do. I think going forward, I really hope that this can be a community where young people feel like they can bring their great ideas for the future of the LWF to their member church, to their region, and to our global networks. And that I can really be a person who helps to say, yeah, let's try it. What do you need? What help do you need? How can I support you? Because I'm just one person, and I don't have all of the meaningful experiences or wisdom that youth in the communion have. So I think I see the youth work of the LWF really going towards that more sustainable youth-led model. I think right now, in my last month in this work, I'm only 1 month in, so maybe the answer will change in another year. But in the last month of this work, it's felt to me like there are some really good youth programs that happen within the LWF, but that many of them are kind of separate, and they really need to be, the youth work of the Lutheran World Federation really needs to be integrated more together. That youth need to have a more substantial and cohesive presence in the communion, which means that the Global Young Reformers Network should relate to the Peace Messengers program and the COP delegation and to the Youth Council when it makes sense, so that we have kind of a strong presence in the communion as a whole. And so I'm really hoping that in the next few years, that's where the youth work of the LWF can go in the world. And finally, I was just talking to the General Secretary the other day, the outgoing General Secretary. We now have a new one, General Secretary-elect as of today. But I was talking to him about the fact that while the LWF has had a 20% youth quota to include at least 20% of youth in governing bodies and programs and leadership, we could talk more about whether or not that's good enough anymore. But I think even though the LWF has that, it's not true that all youth feel like they can participate in their own member churches and their own regions too. And so how do we as youth across the LWF be good partners with member churches and accompany them in increasing and embracing more youth leadership in their own churches? And so that's something that I really want to work on in the next few years as well. In terms of the LAC network, you've done an incredible job in really making youth work, regional youth work, actionable. And so my hope is to learn more from your leadership and to connect you more fully to the good work happening in other regions and to see how that could help everyone grow.
Gracias. Mencionas unas cosas bastante interesantes, sobre todo en el aspecto en que pues hacer de esta red una red más grande, ¿no? Y eso es algo muy emocionante. Solo para recordarles a todos los participantes que pueden poner cualquier pregunta en el chat y nosotros la haremos llegar a Savanna. Y también, bueno, seguramente ya la están ocupando, pero si necesitan traducción, está abajo a la derecha en sus pantallas. Voy a hacerte, Savanna, la siguiente pregunta. En este tiempo que estamos viviendo, ¿cómo entiendes la participación juvenil dentro de la iglesia y dentro de la sociedad? Que se relaciona mucho a lo que decías, que a veces los jóvenes en sus propias iglesias no tienen mucha como luz o idea hacia dónde moverse, ¿no? Entonces, en este sentido, ¿cómo entiendes la participación juvenil dentro de la iglesia y la sociedad?
Yeah, thanks. I think it absolutely is related to this idea that there's not always space for youth to move around in their own churches right now. So thanks for saying that again. To me, I understand youth participation in the church and in society as being important for two reasons. One is because it's just practical. Like, youth have important wisdom and experiences that are unique, and they're valuable because we as a church and a society are facing huge problems, and we need everyone's unique experiences to address those problems. And so it's just practical to me to want to include as many skill sets as possible, and youth have a very specific skill set. The other reason that it's important to me, though, obviously, as a person of faith, is because it's in the Bible. I think it's all over the Bible, but specifically in the life and ministry of Jesus, Jesus says, you know, let the children come to me. Jesus says, little girl, get up. He heals youth for service in the world. And Jesus called disciples who were all themselves young people. So I think it's, as people of faith in the church, we not only should include youth because it is like a good thing to do to help us solve the very big problems that we face, but also because it's faithful. And so I think, to your point, that means that youth need to be in decision-making groups and in charge of programs that involve all of their skill sets in their member churches, not only in conversations about other youth programs and with other youth, but also using their skills as people who are deeply theologically informed to talk about communion, or using their skills to talk about finance, or using their skills to talk about climate justice. It's not just, it shouldn't, I think, in my opinion, be just, you're a youth, talk to these other youth, but that youth leadership is incorporated into every aspect of church leadership and leadership in society as well.
Interesting. And another aspect of leadership is that we know that one of maybe the most difficult things in the work of the church is the transition between generations and the continuity of the work when it happens. So how would be for you an ideal dialogue between generations? And if you could give maybe some examples where you can see this, some practical examples of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think ideal dialogue between generations, there are a couple of like broad things that I think it includes, but I'm really interested to hear also where you all have seen that. So I don't know if people want to like also drop in the chat, maybe, you know, is there a place in your life or church where you've seen really meaningful intergenerational dialogue? I mean, for me, I think ideal dialogue between generations is open and respectful and curious, where we're asking each other questions about how we experience the world rather than judgmental and quick to dismiss. I think a lot of young people especially feel like their perspectives are dismissed sometimes because they don't have as many years of experience. And so I think that posture of curiosity is important in intergenerational dialogue. And then I think ideal intergenerational dialogue happens when we become advocates for each other, when youth are not the only ones calling for youth leadership or looking around a room and saying, why aren't there more youth here? And of course that goes both ways, you know, and it applies to other groups of folks who are not just youth. I mean, that applies to women's leadership as well. And Marcia and I, and she works with the women's program at the LWF, have been talking a lot about the similarities between these two issues. And I think, you know, ideal intergenerational dialogue also acknowledges the really different contexts that have formed each generation's worldview and values those differences. So I never go into an intergenerational conversation without talking to each generation about what specifically in the world and in the church has formed the different generations who are present in that conversation, because I think having that context for each other's lives helps us to be more empathetic with one another. I've seen this a few times in my ministry. The best time for me was I had an intergenerational mentorship program at my university. And I had breakfast every morning with two people from my congregation who were much older than me. And we didn't really have a purpose for it other than to build empathy for each other. And they have become really strong mentors in faith for me and in life, and people with whom I really value a relationship. But it's because they asked a lot of questions and I asked a lot of questions in return. And I think our individual congregations could function that way. I think our member churches could function more that way. And I really hope that in our conversations at the Lutheran World Federation, that we can function in that kind of healthy intergenerational way as well.
Sí, has mencionado cosas muy interesantes y todo esto, escuchar, bueno, he subrayado algunas que me parecieron muy buenas, como escuchar y trabajar con eso que uno escucha, y todo esto nos lleva a la sustentabilidad, y eso es muy, muy bueno, como muy, bueno, trae mucha riqueza escuchar a las personas también. Siguiendo más o menos con esto en mente, ¿cuáles son tus perspectivas para el futuro? O digamos, ¿cuáles son tus principales planes de cara a la Asamblea del 2023, que es como el evento más importante que tenemos en puerta ahora?
Absolutely. That's a huge event. And I mean, just to be honest with you, the first thing that I just want to say again is all of the plans for the future, including the plans for what will happen at the Assembly, will be youth-led. So my plan is to convene a group of youth leaders and ask them what they'd like to do at the Assembly, what's important to them, because again, it's not all my ideas and my perspective. I do have a couple of places I think it would be maybe interesting to start. Of course, at every assembly, we want there to be networking and idea sharing, but I'm wondering, when we bring so many youth leaders together, how can we really make that a space that has an impact on the next 6 years until the next assembly? How do we build momentum in relationships there in person so that the work can continue in a sustainable way for until the next assembly? I am curious about if anybody is interested in maybe readdressing the quota issue. There is a 20% quota. There have to be at least 20% youth in every LWF program and event and governing body, but over half of the world's population is under 30. And that 20% number was chosen in 1984 at an assembly where actually there were already 32% youth in that assembly where they made this rule. And their goal was to have the assembly be 40% youth at the next one, not 20. They said 20 is the floor, 40 is the goal. And so I wonder about if youth are interested maybe in, pushing us as a communion toward a next step, whether that's saying, okay, we've done 1/5 of the assembly has been youth over the last 20 years, 40 years. What would it look like to make that 1/4, like 25%, or even a third, 30%? That would be kind of a big issue, but it's just an idea. I think another really important thing to me is integrating the youth priorities into the overall LWF priorities. If youth are going to spend days at the pre-assembly deciding what's most important to them, I don't understand why those things are still separate from the rest of the LWF priorities. If the youth are saying this is important, I think the LWF needs to say, great, we will adopt those as our own priorities and add these other things from our generational perspective. So I think working toward that integration of youth priorities into LWF priorities will be a big thing at the assembly. And then finally, I've heard from some young women who have been to these assemblies that picking between going to the youth pre-assembly and the women's pre-assembly is really difficult for them and is not very equitable in terms of generation or gender. And so I'm working really closely with my colleague who is my counterpart for the women's program to have at least one full day where young women can attend also the women's pre-conference and not miss anything at the youth pre-conference. So that's something that we're really working on for equity in the future. So those are just some of the plans for the Assembly, but anything could happen.
Ahora, como red de juventud de Latinoamérica y el Caribe, queremos saber cuál es el papel y el rol que desempeñarás con nosotros y qué esperas de nosotros como red.
This is a really great question. And I've said a little bit before, in this whole job, and especially in my relationship with the individual regions, I see my role as someone who convenes people together, someone who's here to accompany you and here for you to bounce your good ideas off of, someone who can help be a motivator, especially to clear some things out of your way if you're having a hard time. I can help motivate the staff at the LWF or talk to some other church leaders as you need help in accomplishing the things that you're really passionate about. My plan is to serve as an administrator. So if you need different things financially or functionally for work and projects that you want to do, I'm here to help with that. And a coordinator to look across the regions and to connect people who are doing similar work or who could learn from one another so that we're all stronger together. I want to support and uplift the good youth work that's already happening, and that is happening all over the LWF. And I also want to be a part of pushing the LWF and its member churches to take really actionable steps toward being a more inclusive church for youth. And that goes beyond quota, as we were talking about. And from you, my hope is that I can expect your continued enthusiastic leadership. This is a really awesome event, and it's a good example of your initiative. So you don't have to come to me with every single thing you want to do. You're just doing it, and I'm here to support you and to amplify your message and to make sure that people hear what you have to say. And I'm not perfect, so another expectation that I have is that you'll let me know when I've gotten something wrong, and that we can build trust with each other in a relationship that is honest about the places where we can do better with one another. A third expectation is that you'll communicate faithfully back to your region and your individual churches what we're working on, what we've decided, because you're way better connected to them than I am. And so that communication role, I think, is a really big piece of what I hope that, that you'll be willing to do in this relationship. And I hope you'll continue along those lines to communicate back to me and to other LWF staff what's happening in your region and ways we can better support you. I want the communication to be more two-way, to be a conversation and not just me sending you updates and like a book report. So those are some of my hopes and expectations. I'm interested in what your expectations of me are as well. So that's something people want to share. I'd love to hear those.
Nice. It's very interesting, your perspective, integrating and supporting initiatives that already exist. And also it's, I think one of the most important things is also the communication, as you said, Leslie. So my question is maybe to explore a little bit more of that. So how do you think communication can be improved within all the youth networks out there? So maybe how could we improve our communication, and how the global network could improve the communication with one another?
Okay.
It's not only reporting, but also, you know, really understanding what's going on and living together, and yeah, also using the means that we have, internet and so on. Yeah,
great. Good question, Renato. And I know that you are especially good at the communication piece. So if you have ideas, you should let me know. But like I was saying, you know, to the last question, I just think that the communication needs to go two ways. And so I'm working to set up, hopefully with the Global Young Reformers Steering Committee members, some kind of like mechanism by which I can get feedback from you and from the youth in your region, as well as, you know, sending out information. And so I'm interested in what better ways we might do that. You know, can we have an open survey? Can we have feedback on via email or via social media? I think there are a lot of ways to do that. And I'm interested in thinking through what might be most effective. And then the second thing I think is that communication needs to be more regular by social media, email, or both. So I'm hoping that we can have a monthly check-in with Global Young Reformers where we can bring up some of these issues, but where people always know that they can come and listen to each other and find information. And then I don't know how many of you have looked at the LWF youth social media pages, but they need some love and care. So really hoping that we can revamp some of that, that we could do like Instagram lives with different youth around the world, that we can send information to each other this way, that we can share good ideas in groups and on open fora on social media, because I think it's a really effective way for youth to communicate with one another that we maybe, you know, at least over the last year, really haven't been able to do. Also, the website hasn't been updated, can I just say, since 2014. So that is something that I'm working on this week because they're still talking about the 500th anniversary on the website. And I'm like, that happened a while ago. So I think just kind of basic communication stuff like that too, where you know that you have somewhere to go to get reliable information that's updated about what's happening with the youth program, and you don't have to wait always on an email from me.
Claro, puedo rescatar y me gusta mucho esta idea que nos das de que la comunicación va hacia dos lados, ¿no? Todo el tiempo. Y puedo decir en nombre de todos que estamos muy emocionados poder trabajar contigo y compartir información, compartir vivencias, lo que sea en realidad. Hay bastantes, bueno, tenemos algunas preguntas de los participantes. Tenemos gente de muchos lugares, hay gente que nos acompaña pues desde Namibia, que es lo que puedo estar viendo aquí. Bueno, hay gente que nos acompaña desde Europa y gente de Latinoamérica. Entonces vamos a pasar a un momento de las preguntas del público, si te parece bien, para seguir con esta conversación. Entonces no sé si Renato, ¿tienes algunas preguntas del público que quisieras compartirnos?
Yeah, so the first one is from Moti from Ethiopia. And his question is, have you read the three thematic areas of LWF youth? What's your vision and how do you plan to achieve that? Yeah, so that's the first question or questions, yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Modi. I have read the three thematic areas that were established of emphasis that were established by youth at the last LWF Youth Pre-Assembly, and think that those thematic areas are really important. You know, climate has been a place where youth have really led the LWF for the past 10 years already, and I think this is something that, along with education and and some of the other issues raised that we want to keep investing in. But what I really want to say today, I really want you to hear me say that I am one person who cannot implement all of the priority areas. And what I'm really interested in is setting the table and helping set the table so that you can tell me how you want to address these issues. Because not only can I not be in 150 countries at once, but I don't know what's best for the implementation of those emphasis areas in every member church. And I shouldn't, you know, so I really look forward, like I said, my style of leadership is to work really hard to clear a path for youth to be able to lead from all levels. And so I'm excited to hear your ideas about where we could go in the next 6 months, in the next year, in the next 2 years.
Nice. And another question is, what do you, from Modi, what do you envision and see LWF Youth Desk when you leave the office? So maybe the achievements that you want to achieve when you get there. So thinking about the future. Yeah.
Oh, what a thoughtful question. Thank you. You know, I hope that when I leave, there are 100 more youth who have been formed in leadership who could also easily do this. My hope is that when I leave, there's not a huge hole, that I have worked in a way that has made it clear that the youth work of the LWF belongs to all the youth, and that they don't need a boss to tell them what to do, but they need someone to help accompany them. I hope that maybe there will be a slightly higher quota for youth leadership in the LWF when I leave, we'll see. But that certainly across the regions, young people feel like more of their member churches are investing in their leadership and acknowledging the things that they really have to offer to ministry. I hope that we have more churches that have Global Young Reformers delegates. That's kind of like a measurable that I really hope that we can get to. There are especially some regions where it's difficult for us right now to, or where we haven't been able to get nominations for the Global Young Reformers Network from. So one really actionable goal is to have more churches represented in that network as well.
Claro, muchas gracias, muchas gracias. Seguimos recibiendo preguntas. Hay una pregunta muy interesante, la voy a leer en español. Dice, buenos días, soy la pastora Ángela Trejo Hager de la Iglesia Luterana Mexicana. Soy una de las coordinadoras de la Red de Mujeres de América Latina. Desde esta red te felicitamos por el trabajo ya realizado y te preguntamos lo siguiente. ¿Consideras trabajar en algunos temas como género con la red de mujeres? Y bueno, hay una segunda pregunta. ¿Será importante pensar en un trabajo intergeneracional? Well, I think you're not listening to the translation, right?
Right.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna read it in English. Yeah. Sorry.
Right.
So I'm just gonna repeat it. It's a question from a pastor of the Mexican Lutheran Church. It's from Ángela Trejo Hager, and she writes, I am one of the coordinators of the youth network in Latin America. We congratulate you from the network for the work that you have done, and we want to ask you the next thing. Would you consider working in some topics as gender with the youth with the women's network? And would it be important to think in an intergenerational work?
Absolutely, that's a great question. I mentioned a few times my new colleague, Marcia. She is also only about a month and a half in, but we've already been talking a lot. She's the program executive for gender justice and programs with women. And so we've already been talking a lot about the overlap in this work, the kind of intersections of youth work and gender justice. She told me a story of how at the last LWF Assembly in Namibia, the women's network and the youth network kind of got together to plan before. And so whenever a woman would go up to the mic to raise a point, there would also be a youth there to support her. And then they did the same, that when a youth went up to the mic with a perspective or to change something, then also a woman would go up and support them. And I think that that's because these issues, the justice and equity issues for different generations and for women, have a lot of similarities. So I hope that we'll be able to work together programmatically with the women's program, maybe in a similar way that we're working right now with the climate program and with the peace building program in the LWF. So it'd be really interesting to think about what are other ways that we could, not just at the assembly, but over the course of the year, do some youth-led programming about gender justice, or do some intergenerational conversations between women of all generations about what church leadership looks like for them. And if you have an amazing idea about how to make that happen, I would really love to hear it. If it's been working in your member church or your region, let's talk about it. I'll have my email sent out to all of you, and I'm happy to hear what you think would be a great next step in that work.
Thank you. It's great to listen to that. And of course, I'll go back again to what I was saying, but the communication, as you said, is really important, and we're looking forward to communicate.
Yeah.
Renato, could you keep going with the questions? I'm gonna go to the translating part. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll read the question from Carla. She is the member of the LWF Council and represents the LAC region in the council. And she asks you how maybe you could explore a little bit more of that. So how would be an effective intergenerational dialogue in all levels? So not only local, but also thinking regionally and in a global level. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to be honest with, Carla knows this, and all of you, I'm still learning a lot about how the conversations happen on a regional level right now, and how they have happened on a global level before, and how they're happening now as well. So maybe I won't have as full an answer as you want immediately, but I think for me, it's forming really strong relationships with the youth leaders in those regions and following their lead. I know every cultural context is different, especially when it comes to intergenerational dialogue, but I really want to be someone as a staff person who is supporting the voices of the young people who are there. And so I think meaningful intergenerational dialogue is going to have to look like maybe encouraging some older leaders who have been unwilling maybe to give up some of their talking time. So I don't know, does it look like kind of talking about equitable even time, talking during a meeting at the beginning, and then trying to hold one another accountable to that? Does it look like having kind of paired conversations for people in different generations? So for example, if we're having a regional consultation, how might we pair up a few leaders from an older generation with a few young leaders outside the main meetings, so that they can form some relationships, so they can get to know each other and build mutual respect, and then really go into those larger meetings, consultations, decision-making spaces, knowing that the other has something meaningful to contribute. I think that kind of really intentional relationship building will take a little bit more time at some of our meetings, but I think could be a valuable place to start in terms of helping people of all generations see what other generations are bringing to that conversation. Those are two ideas that I have. But again, I'm still learning a lot about how these conversations have been put together in the past. And so welcome any wisdom that other people who have been a part of the global work of the LWF for a bit longer have to offer as well.
Nice. I have, I think, 3 more questions. I'll try to include them in one big question. So yeah, and then you could yeah, also talk. I think they somehow can be connected, and then yeah, I think that then we can yeah, end the interaction with those final questions. All right, but you don't necessarily need to connect all of them, but I'll read them and then you put together as you think it's best. Okay, so yeah, one question is whether you will include formal global young reformers in the programs and plans of the LWF youth. Also, maybe some tips or how to, as a regional youth, what activities can regional youth networks or groups do, regionally speaking. And also how to work with marginalized regions in Latin America. So this question from Bolivia. Yeah. Yes, and also one last question is, can we not have regional youth leaders, chairperson on a voluntary basis, so that we can have regional conferences and other things? So that's another question from Elsin. Yeah, so I think that would be it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I wrote your few questions down so I can try to address as many aspects of them as I can in the next few minutes. But I just wanted to say again, I welcome ongoing conversation about this. If folks who are watching want to reach out to me, I'm happy to talk about this. I know I've been messaging with some of you on Facebook or WhatsApp or via email, and that's just fine. Those are fine ways to get in touch with me. In terms of the regional work of LWF Youth, we do have now appointed / volunteer representatives from each region. We're working with, I know Kulakani was on this call before, we're working with some of the youth council members, especially from Africa region and Asia region, to get representatives from the sub-regions in those regions. Using the word region a lot, to coordinate youth work in those areas as well. So what I would say about how to get connected to them is I'm working with those youth council members to get those folks in place. If you're interested in that, you can, in being a regional representative, you can let me know. But we also talk with the leaders in the member churches about who they'd like to nominate for those positions sometimes. So look out for the information on who are your regional representatives. I'll be posting in the Global Young Reformers Facebook group this week with the steering committee members from each region. So the regional representatives that we have in place for Latin America and the Caribbean. We're hoping to get a person or two from North America soon, from the Asia and Africa regions as soon as we have them, as well as from Europe. So you'll have their names, and they are responsible in part for communicating back with the regions about how individuals can get involved in the work that's going on near them. In terms of including former Global Young Reformers in plans, I think part of the hope is that the Global Young Reformers Network can be a network for connection and leadership development and planning, but that a lot of the events and plans and initiatives that we come up with for that network will be open to all youth. Because we want this to be a global movement of Lutheran youth and not just one or two people from each church that get the opportunity to be a part of this work. So I think there will absolutely be initiatives and programs that have open invitations to probably not just Lutheran youth. I think we could do more ecumenical work and more interfaith work. So I'm hopeful that there will be a place for everyone to plug in the next few months here as we decide what really our first initiatives and actions are going to be as the Global Young Reformers Network. And then in terms of how to work with marginalized regions in Latin America, again, learning a lot. And so learning about the dynamics between the churches in each region is a big part of that. And so I'd love to talk more about what the perception is between the different churches and how I can best support the work that's going on in smaller churches as well as larger churches. And so I would really just encourage you. I'm not going to pretend like I have all of the knowledge on that topic already. So I would really encourage you to reach out. I'd love to hear about how we can support you. But I think part of it is working really hard to make sure that regional representation at events, in-person events and online events, happens not only from the largest churches or from the most historic churches, but also happens from churches who are a bit smaller or a bit younger. Because we want to make sure, we know everyone has unique perspectives, and I want to make sure it's not just the same youth who are coming to every single event. And so that's really a way that I think we can also deepen the impact of this work and this network and form more folks as leaders and have them form the work of the LWF as well.
Muchas gracias por tus respuestas. Sabemos que hay más preguntas todavía, incluso había personas que levantaron su mano para participar. Sin embargo, bueno, tenemos que empezar a cortar un poco el tiempo. Pero si estás de acuerdo, podemos escribir todas estas preguntas y hacértelas llegar para que las puedas responder y nosotros las publicamos después. Bueno, o sea, publicamos tus respuestas. Muchas gracias por haber estado con nosotros. Y agradecemos, amigos y amigas, a todos ustedes por estar aquí. Como vieron, ha sido el primer webinar que nosotros como Red de Jóvenes de Latinoamérica organizamos. Seguimos aprendiendo mucho y lo hicimos también con mucho cariño para que cada vez más personas se involucren con nosotros. Por lo pronto les adelantamos que va a haber 2 más en el año. Nosotros estaremos publicando quiénes van a participar con nosotros, pero bueno, es parte de los proyectos que tenemos a futuro. Querida Savanna, tu contribución y participación han sido invaluables. Te agradecemos mucho y esperamos que Dios bendiga tu trabajo y que podamos caminar junto contigo como red y como parte de la Federación Luterana Mundial. Muchísimas gracias.
Apreciamos grandemente este momento y espacio que tuvimos como Juventud de Latinoamérica y el Caribe. Sabemos que tenemos grandes retos, metas y sueños, pero asimismo sabemos que estamos día a día desde cada uno de nuestros países trabajando porque la juventud tenga diferentes conocimientos en temas que nos importan y que es de lo que la juventud habla cada día. Aunque nuestras culturas son diferentes y tenemos variedades de país a país, siempre encontramos un punto de encuentro donde todo lo que hablamos, pensamos y tal vez anhelamos es universal. Es sentir que todos y todas tenemos que tener una juventud empoderada para el trabajo de nuestras iglesias y que por medio de esto podamos aportar a una mejor sociedad y unas generaciones comprometidas con Dios, el prójimo, la creación y la construcción de un mundo justo y lleno de vida. Por tal razón, sabemos que las palabras tienen poder, Así que los invito en este momento a que podamos decir o escribir en el chat una palabra poderosa que nos permita concluir este espacio deseando, afirmando e invocando lo que queremos para nuestro trabajo como juventud, desde cualquier rol que nosotros tengamos. A cada palabra contestaremos así sea.
Bueno, yo quisiera empezar. A mí me gustaría decir, como se repitió muchas veces, buena comunicación. Bueno, son dos. Buena comunicación. Aquí, Rocky dice que él quiere decir incidencia.
I would say ongoing dialogue, right? Like trying to communicate as much as possible, right? And then, yeah, learning more. Learning more every day. Yeah.
Pues que así sea. Que así sea y que todo esto se cumpla y que una vez más podamos seguir caminando. Muchísimas gracias una vez más y esperamos encontrarnos virtualmente o en persona en el futuro y siempre caminando de la mano de Dios. Muchas gracias. Voy a dejar de grabar.